our first attempt ever to have a keynote listening session like this, where an opportunity for all of you to actively listen and learn about the proposed Pebble Mine and environmental impact statement. I think it's going to be a benefit for all of you who have knowledge and ability how to have effective comment and have your input heard. Well, I'll have each of the panelists here introduce themselves. I just let them introduce. Everybody knows Brigitte Downey, of course, but I don't know if you know that she is, in fact, my biggest fan. And so the story goes, a couple summers ago in a camp down in Halford, I may have had a couple of whiskeys, and I was playing guitar, and my friends were singing, and she gave me a standing ovation. And the band just disbanded, and we've never played since, but that was good. Now you know where you know me from. So she's the only one who's ever heard me play guitar in this room, or sing for that matter. So with that, are we mic'd up yet? Sure. All right, at this point, Maria's in charge. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for listening.
Well, that's really funny, because I stopped and I know you from somewhere, I know you from somewhere. I still remember there was some risky behavior around the campfire, and a few drinks here and there, but it was fun. It was a great group, great music, all in Hope, Alaska. Well, good morning, everyone. Before we begin, I want to thank the Forum on behalf of the community for all you do for more than 2 decades to bring all sides of issues together, because a more informed Alaska is an Alaska that makes better decisions. So we really want to thank the Forum. Thank you so much for year-round, for every year bringing us these top key issues that affect Alaska. I'm going to go move over here now because my mic's there. That works. Can you hear me? Can you hear everybody? Okay. So we want to make sure that everybody knows this is not a formal debate, it's a discussion. We're going to basically talk about the different issues and all the sides of the issues of the Pebble Mine, which we've been hearing about for years. And we're going to start out with hearing just a bit from each panelist, a little bit about their personal lives, but also how their background has gotten them to where they are today, involved in this issue, and their careers as they are now. I'll just start off real quickly with the review. I've been up here for 37 years. I was born in New York, lived there until I was 12, Fort Lauderdale, and then I came up here 37 years ago. I'll tell you my age because then you can figure out the math really quickly. When I came up, it was like everybody else, come up for 2 years, have an adventure, then move back to the lower 48. South Florida, a lot of my friends were in journalism there, and I thought, well, that's probably where I want to end up. Just like everybody else who is not born in Alaska, I fell in love with the state. This really is my home. I feel more connected to the people here and the state as a whole than any place I've ever been. It's just rich cultures and traditions here. I still remember when I first came here, I was working at Channel 13 at the time, and I got a call from AFN. And there were 3 women on speakerphone. And each one was convinced, in fact, I do believe there was a monetary betting going on, that I was from their region. They not only thought I was Alaska Native, but they thought I was from their particular region, which I was very flattered, that they thought I was part of their family and part of their culture. For the record, I'm 100% Italian. I do have the dark hair, dark eyes, and fit right in. But I have to tell you that the reason that I am still here today is not only because my children have a wonderful place to raise kids, my daughter is 31, my son is 29, but also because I do feel statewide, wherever I go, I have that connection to Alaskans and the wonderful, diverse cultures that we have here. So that's a little bit about my story, and why I stayed in journalism was because I really feel it's important that we share these views, all the views, all sides of the story, with no bias, and present these issues to you every night. So that's why I'm still doing what I'm doing. A little bit about me, and if you can introduce yourself and a little bit about your story as well.
Great, thank you. It's great to see everybody here today, and hope you enjoy our panel discussion. I've been involved in natural resources development work for probably 40 years, most of that in Washington, D.C.
And this is Thomas Collier, by the way.
My name is
Pebble
Tom
Partnership.
Collier.
Go ahead.
And I'm the CEO of Pebble Partnership. I spent 3 or 4 years working in the Clinton administration, working for Bruce Babbitt and for Al Gore. and had the opportunity during that time to manage some of the most challenging environmental issues in America. I worked on and managed, hands-on managed the EIS for the spotted owl timber crisis in the Pacific Northwest. I worked on the Everglades sugar challenge in Florida, and then ran a program to completely rewrite grazing regulations throughout the entire western part of the United States. Each one of these was a big challenge. It was development worth it versus protecting the environment. So I was pretty well suited, I think, to take on the Pebble issue. Moved up here 5 years ago to become the CEO, and love Alaska. See myself staying, and want to be part of the community for a long time. Look forward to talking to the rest of the panelists today and to all of you as we go through it. Thank
you.
Wonderful. My name is Sheila Newman, and I'd like to thank you all for the invitation this morning. On behalf of myself and on behalf of the United States Army, a little bit about myself, convoluted background maybe. I was active duty in the military at 17, daughter of a Marine, so it was the direction that I headed in life. Married an active duty serviceman, brought us to Alaska in 1997. At the same time, I had the opportunity to go to college, and I went to the University of Alaska in Fairbanks and earned my undergraduate degrees in wildlife biology and biological sciences. And for those of you who have studied at UAF, you know it is a biologist's playground. And it was a wonderful experience, and we never wanted to leave Alaska. The United States military told us, well, yes, indeed, we would leave Alaska. So we had to leave the state in 2004, and my husband's career continued, and he finally retired, and in 2014, we had the opportunity to come back to Alaska. And all in between there, it was a really interesting journey. I spent many, many years as a coal program manager for the Corps of Engineers in the Appalachia region. And I would not have envisioned my life becoming a mining expert for the United States Army or anything else, but that is where I am today. I'm the Deputy Division Chief for our Regional Regulatory Division now for the Corps of Engineers, covering Alaska and Hawaii. Quite a hardship, as you can imagine. And I really am looking forward to sharing with you the Army's role today in the environmental review process for this permit application that we received, and hoping to provide you with information on how you can participate in the ongoing process and what that timeline is.
Very good.
And I'll also say, I have a 27-year-old daughter who was educated in Fairbanks and really loves it as well. Now works for FEMA, and she's 26.
Alaska strong kids, don't you agree? They're the toughest. They go up to school, they can deal with anything. Former Senator Rick Halford, take it away.
I am Rick Halford. I came up as a college student in 1966. Never left. I thought I'd guide you on it. But I have spent my entire adult life as either a commercial pilot, registered guide, or I took a 24-year detour into the political process and retired finally in 2003 as Senate President. But I don't think I ever ran for office without the support of the mining industry. I was certainly proud of that support. It was a shock to me to find a project that was so difficult that I thought it wouldn't work with the conditions and the location it sits and the type of ore body it is or the size of it. But I've been actively involved with a number of organizations based primarily in Bristol Bay in the Pebble consideration over the last dozen years.
And just quickly, just to clarify, you were here to represent the people and tribes of Bristol. Is that correct? I just want to make sure everybody knows who's here representing them.
Well, of course, they represent themselves far better than I could, and actually the area itself, for those who look at it, is something beyond what you could say in words.
All right, so let's start with Sheila Newman. So one reason we're doing this today is because I believe it's the 22nd, the environmental impact statement, the draft environmental impact statement is due with the Army from the Army permit. Can you tell us exactly what is in the EIS, what makes that up, and how you collect that information?
Yeah, and that's a great question. Let me start at the beginning of what the Army's role is and why The Corps of Engineers has a responsibility to evaluate permit applications under specifically Section 404 of the Clean Water Act and Section 10 of the Rivers and Harbors Act. Pebble Limited Partnership submitted an application requesting authorization under those two acts in December of 2017. That compelled the Army to initiate our review process, and in the deliberation of what type of NEPA tool we would use to evaluate this permit application, we determined an EIS was going to be necessary. So we are specifically charged with evaluating discharges of earthen material, which you'll hear referred to as spill material, and determining whether or not the requested activities in navigable waterways are allowable under the Rivers and Harbors Act. What you'll find in the environmental impact statement is the first thing, which is what the applicant, Pebble, proposed, and you'll find multiple alternatives to what the applicant proposed identified for you. And then you will get what's called a baseline analysis for affected environment discussion, which says this is what is existing today, followed by an assessment of the environmental impacts, both positive and negative, of what any of those proposed actions would do. Directly after that is a section on potential mitigation efforts for those affected resources. That is a summation of what is in an EIS. It's a document specifically designed to inform the decisions that we have to make. And those specific decisions are whether or not the discharge that the applicant has asked for complies with the federal act, the Clean Water Act, and whether their navigable activities in navigable waters comply with the Rivers and Harbors Act. So ultimately, the EIS is designed to be a decision-making tool for a federal agency. The draft EIS will be on our public website on the 22nd of March. The formal comment period will begin with the Federal Register notice, which is scheduled for the 1st of March.
Okay, we'll talk a little bit later too about the next step, which would be public comment, and how we can participate in that. That calculus that we've done, we're going to address that too, on how you can respond, no matter what the side you are. So Tom says you're awaiting this, and no, Sheila will not give us a preview, I've asked, of what we're going to expect here in the wait. Tell us what your vision for Pebble, because I think part of the confusion, people aren't sure what the plan is. It's changed, it hasn't been very precise. What is the bottom line on your vision for Pebble?
So when I was hired back in the beginning of 2014, one of the charges I was given was to take a fresh look at the entire project and to reconsider everything that Pebble had been considering in the past. And while Pebble had not put forward a specific plan, there had been a lot of talk about the general kind of contours of what we put forward. And my beginning point was to take a look at what the objections were that we were hearing from Rick and from a lot of other people in the region. And then to try to redesign the project to respond to those objections. And so the first one was that the project was just too big. And so we reduced the project by more than half the size that it originally had contemplated. And that allowed for a lot of other changes. We would have been in 3 drainages. We're now only going to be in 2. The tailings facility will only be in 1. Those are pretty significant changes. We're not going to have any waste rock piles. That's a big deal, because often on mine sites, that's something where you get acid drainage, and we have to do perpetual monitoring. Won't be any waste rock piles in this project. We separated out the pyritic tailings. Those are the tailings that might generate acid, and store them in a separate facility. It's a smaller facility. It's completely lined and double buttressed so that it's safe. Took a hard look at water treatment. We have redundant water treatment facilities. We decided that we would not do what's called secondary gold recovery. We're leaving 15% of the gold that's in the project there. care, and that means we don't bring in cyanide to the region. We took a look. Everyone's concerned about what happens if there's an accident. Took a hard look at modeling what would happen if there was an accident. So we know exactly what will happen. We looked at what EPA had done in terms of its modeling of accidents. After all of that work, we think we put forward a project that, in our mind, has been de-risked from the concerns that were expressed by the and it's a project we think that's exactly the way to come at this work. My team is excited about the EIS coming out here in the next week or so. We think it will show that this is a project that we have studied appropriately, that we know what the impacts will be, and that we can move forward with. And we're pretty eager to do that. The flip side of what I just said is that there will be a significant economic boom to this part of Alaska. We're going to bring in 1,000 jobs paying $100,000 a year to the mine site, and another 1,000 paying $100,000 a year to the rest of Alaska. And 10 to 12 more thousand in the lower 48. So this is a project that generates a lot of economic opportunity for the state in a region that needs that economic opportunity. We pledged some time ago that we would not go forward with this project if there were any significant concern that we would damage the fishery in Bristol Bay. And we've become convinced with the scientific study, more scientific study that's maybe been done on any other project that's going forward, that we will not damage that fishery. And we think the fishery and the mine can go forward together, both providing jobs and both providing economic opportunity.
So Rick, what is your reaction to that? It is 50% of the size people, or some of the, what Pebble says, or some of the protections in place. What are the people of the region still concerned about?
Well, of course, you have to decide whether you can take the proposal seriously, because it has been changed so often just in the last year than before. But now it's 3 times the size of all the mines in Alaska's past history in terms of production size. It's way bigger than Duncan, not in area, but in production. But it is still a very big proposal, but a tiny fraction of the total amount there. It's a totally new proposal this year. And digesting all of it with the ferry, with the, there's the history of the project that goes through Caminco, to Rio, to Mitsubishi, to Anglo, and to First Quantum. Major backers have backed away from it for economic reasons. And when you build a system that has lower upfront cost with a ferry and transshipping from, you load it onto vehicles, you take it to the shore, you take it across the lake, you take it across another piece, transloading and everything else. The economics of the proposal are, in my mind, in question. And I don't think we've seen the data to say that that proposal is economic. But if it is, it's its own description of what happens when it ends. This is, instead of being a 5,000-foot deep deposit, and I guess we could put the slide up that shows the original size of the whole deposit. But the economics are in question. The size, we don't have that slide yet. If we could get someone to put that slide up.
When we pop it up, we can talk more about that. But the question, so economically you're talking about, but what about what Tom said about environmentally? Is there anything that the people of Bristol Bay would agree on, or is it just pretty much no risk to the
Well,
salmon?
of course, I think everybody agrees with the question about cyanide. But the problem with Pebble isn't what you bring in, it's what's already there. It would be a sulfur mine that were named for primarily what the content is in terms of much more sulfur than there is gold or copper or anything else. Not anything, because there's other metals there. But the point is, the sulfur, once it's ground to a powder, this whole system is to dig a huge hole in the ground, in this case about 1,500 feet deep. that hole by gravity dewaters everything around it. That hole is just a few hundred feet away from the drainage of a Collier, which they're saying they're not going to impact now. And there's a lot of data in their own environmental baseline studies to show the exchange between those drainages. But you dig a 15-foot hole, 1,500-foot hole, and you dewater everything around it. And 20 years later, by their own description, when they stop mining, that hole slowly fills up. Everything is dewatered. They talk about in their own descriptions, and this has changed since their first description, but the pit lake expected to stratify during closure period of surface waters, retaining slightly neutral pH. The lower depths are certain. And this is, again, a 1,500-foot hole full of water. But it's got arsenic, cadmium, all the things that were left on the pit walls are now poisoning the water. So it's a lake of poison that backfeeds all the drainages that it grew out of. And those are undefined. The environmental baseline data talks about the geology of the area and how porous it is, how there's exchange between groundwater and surface water. And all of that is the same, but instead of being as big as it was with the 10.8 billion tons they talk about when they talk to the stock market looking for investors, it's on a smaller scale, but it's much, much sooner. This starts, and my kids, when they're thinking about flying or looking for caribou or fishing or traveling, they can fly across a hole that looks like the Berkeley pit and has the same kind of water quality problems at the headwaters of Bristol Bay.
Okay, Tom, you want to respond fairly quickly? I want to go to Sheila right after you to talk more about the specifics of the environmental concerns or issues.
Let me start with size. Significant thing about size in the mine project is footprint. And the footprint of this mine will be less than half what was originally contemplated. And in fact, in the ballpark of what the Obama administration EPA said, ought to be able to go through the permitting process. And so the saying that the size of this mine is not as we are now characterized is just wrong. It will be smaller than the Don project in terms of its footprint, and it will not be the largest mine in the state of Alaska. It's an important consideration. When we talk about connectivity of water, we've spent $150 million understanding the hydrology of this area. We know it well, and we know it very carefully. And we are confident that the hydrology of the area will not allow any impact on Upper Tulare Creek, notwithstanding the fact that there is a hydrological connection there at one point. The proof of whether I'm characterizing things correctly or Rick is characterizing things correctly will be in this draft document that the Corps of Engineers will be issuing. That's the reason we do EISs. There'll be a draft, everyone will be able to comment on it, and then there'll be a final. It will be a scientific review of the environmental impacts of proposed projects. The implication that we have made a lot of changes in the past. There's not a mining project in the world that doesn't make changes as it matures. That's a good thing. As you learn more, make a proposed change to the project. But you can only build and manage what is permitted. Once we get a permit from the Corps of Engineers, that locks us in. You can't make any changes unless we go back and start the permitting process all over again. So we've had a maturation process over 20 years to figure out the best way to come at this proposed mine in Bristol Bay, and we think we found it. That's what we're moving forward with. That's what we ought to be talking about. We're pretty confident that this EIS process will show that the science that's there should be interpreted the way that we interpret it. It doesn't present a risk to the fish in Bristol Bay.
So Sheila, and I know we have to be really fine line here because you are in the middle of the report. You can't release anything on that at this point. But what they're both talking about, the water issue. What is the key focus of the environmental impact statement and concerns?
regarding any mine that would go into the Bristol Bay headwaters. What we learned through the public scoping process was that the public was interested in three key areas. The primary public interest through scoping was socioeconomic impacts, followed by wildlife and fisheries, running a close second and third. So the resources that are being really strongly evaluated in the EIS include wildlife, include socioeconomic, water quality is part of that. I think the most interesting or important thing to remember about the environmental impact statement process is that there are a team of technical experts dissecting the science that's presented, and that is the view that you will get in the draft environmental impact statement. It is the role of the Corps of Engineers to be objective. The scientific experts all have to go through a conflict of interest screening prior to working on an environmental impact statement from us. So they're not sharing, a for or against project view. They are looking at the science and will be sharing with the public what they have found in review of the information that we have required.
Now, Tom had talked about some of the economic benefits of Pebble. We were talking back there about some of the paradox, something within families. Basically, everybody wants to connect to fish, but at the same time, it would be a much welcome economic boom, and families are, of course, split about this reason. What are you finding? Is there somewhere within the balance, or are people pretty much split? Do you see any kind of consensus?
Well, I guess all mines aren't good and all mines aren't bad. And there are areas where mining is the lifeline of the communities. In this area, fisheries are the lifeline of the communities. Whenever you propose a development project, it's always a starting point to say you can have both. I'm afraid that in this case, you probably can't have both. If you look at the history of this type of mine, this type of an ore body, in a high water area, there's never been one that hasn't had major problems with water quality. And Pebble is huge. But I just wanted to go back to one thing that Tom said about how you can separate these drainages. This is their own database, which, by the way, I appreciate the efforts of Anglo and the companies that have since walked away because of the data they found. But they put together a lot of information that's available to the Corps and everyone else. But this is in their environmental baseline data in the executive summary. And the statement is simply, the Pebble deposit area straddles the watershed boundary between the South Fork of the Cockatoolie and Upper Telluride Creek and lies close to the upper reaches of the North Fork of the Cockatoolie. The fact is, if God were challenging us, he couldn't put a major sulfide deposit of tremendous size in a more challenging place than the headwaters that separate the two biggest drainages of Bristol Bay. And the interchange of water and the connectivity of water goes both ways because it flows downstream, but the fish have to come through it to go upstream. So it goes both directions. And although it's a small portion of the total, it has a significant impact on that total. And the database, their database, is available. The Corps of Engineers, I know, is using the big, thick versions of all this data that was gathered at the cost of millions and millions of dollars. But the bottom line is, this is one of the few places where even with active management, the risks may be too high. This is the last stronghold of 5 species salmon and their complete dependent cultures in North America, if not on the planet.
So Tom, as someone, your background, I'm glad you built on your background, is mostly environmental. And now with the mining, you hear Rick Halford and people in the region are concerned. You have to, I'm suspecting that you're aware of those because you have been on the environmental side before. How are you working with both of those debates?
Rick's wrong in the science.
That's not accurate.
Excuse me?
Did you say you didn't?
I'm saying Rick is wrong about the
Oh,
science. And I wouldn't be proposing this mine if I thought Upper Telluride Creek, Bristol Bay region, was hired. That's what I spent 5 years taking a look at. Rick's right. We've got more environmental data on this particular site and location than any project has probably had in America that's gone in permanent. And Rick can interpret the science, my scientists can interpret the science, but ultimately, the independent third party sitting between us here is going to say what the science is. That's why we're eager to look at this draft EIS. That's why we're eager to have a public comment period about it. And that's why we want to see the final document that's drafted. We are confident. We wouldn't be investing the money that we're investing in this project if we had the slightest doubt that the science was any different than we say it is. We're not going to risk the fish in Bristol Bay, and we're going to bring an economic boom to the region. They can coexist. They can move forward. Alaska has a solid history of mines that operate without environmental issues. This is the place that you get the best regulatory review and constant attention anywhere in America. This is the place. Rigor here is better than anywhere else. And that's where we're building this mine. The people that are against this mine are not against copper. I know Rick's got a cell phone. I saw him turn it off before we walked up here on the stage. He's not offering to give up his cell phone. And most of the environmental community that's against this, they don't want to give up the electric car. They don't want to give up wind turbines. They don't want to give up solar energy. Those things are driven by copper. And if we don't mine the copper in America, we force ourselves to have it mined in third world countries where there aren't rigorous protections. And you end up with disasters like we've seen in Brazil and other places. That won't happen in America. And that's the reason that we've got the independent bodies like the Corps of Engineers here to review the plans, to review the science. And that's why we've got the state authorities here to make sure that the plans are implemented appropriately. And that's the reason this project, I think, ought to go forward.
Now, one thing, we're running out of time, but I do want to end with Sheila. So basically, the reason we're all here, we're hearing these sides, we've been talking for a long time. There's so many other topics that we could be tackling about that whole. But Sheila, for those who are here and do want to, it all does, it is based on the EIS when that comes out. The science will be there. How can people, after they see this draft report, respond, and what can they do?
So when the draft comes out on the 22nd, folks will be able to review the document in its entirety. There are existing public websites. I'm not sure if we have the ability to put the website slide up.
That would be great. All the information will be on.
So we have a public website, the pebbleprojecteis.com, and that website has been in existence for well over a year now. We have been updating it with real-time information from the time we stood it up. So right now, you can review all of the baseline information, all of the things that we've requested the applicant to provide to us, which I think have been something in the neighborhood of 160 requests at this point. All of the scoping documents, the thousands of scoping comments, everything we have is on that website and has been updated in real time, and we continue to notify folks that are on the mailing list and whenever we update it. But you can go to that public website. Oh yeah, there it is. And I didn't realize that we were off on that screen until 2 minutes ago. But you can go through this website and you'll see where public comments are. And on that public comment, you'll have the ability to input comments directly on the draft EIS. We'll also be conducting 9 public hearings. Those public hearings will be in the same places that we did public scoping meetings earlier last year. You can also provide us with written comments as well. I think the thing is, folks have been, I lost my words, excuse me. All of the information here is everything that we, the Corps of Engineers, has looked at in the review of this draft environmental impact statement. So if we've received it and used it in the review, it's already on that site. It has been for months and months and months. The applicant's permit application has been on that website for over a year for folks to take a look at it. So I encourage you to familiar with the site, and certainly if you have any questions or issues, contact our staff, which all of our contact information is up there as well. When the Federal Register notice comes out for the draft EIS, the public will have 90 days to submit comments to us to let us know your views on the information that's contained within. So that is an important time frame for folks to remember. So the Federal Register notice we expect to come out March 1st, and for the subsequent 3 months will be available for public comment. Public hearings are scheduled for the 3rd week in March and the 1st full week in April. And we will have those meeting times and locations updated on this website by the time the Federal Register notice is published.
Okay, very good. So in closing, and we don't have that much time left, but in closing, is there anything else, a little snippet, if nothing else that you want people to remember today about what you're trying to get across? What do you hope, Rick?
Well, number one, the core timeframe hopefully will be as long as it was for Don. And that's over 6 months in that case. But I know there's strong interest in being able to review some fraction of the 350,000 pages of documents involved in the people of Western Alaska. So that's one question that I hope the Corps considers seriously. And the final thing is that, I'm neither a lawyer nor a scientist, but I just read what Pebble's documents say about the exchange of the water and how that system works. And it is impossible to separate Upper Tulare Creek from the drainages of the North Fork and the South Fork, particularly the South Fork. And their own documentation says it very clearly in their summary and in their massive volume of data. So I think those questions are out there. The final question is it reasonable to expect multinational interests to build a small mine and go down 1,500 feet in a low quality ore body compared to the massive ore body that they also are holding and presenting to the market looking for investors? Is it reasonable for them to get down to the highest value ore and then stop mining? There is no small alternative to Pebble deposit by their own database.
And Tom, is there anything in closing, if nothing else, that people remember about what you had to say today? What was the one message you'd like to get across in closing?
So it's Rick's last point. That when you summarize it, it's the argument that all we're doing here is we're camel trying to get our nose under the tent, and then we're going to build a bigger project. And I kind of like hearing that argument from our opponents because I interpret it as an admission that there's really no significant environmental challenge with what we're now proposing. That their real fear is what might come next. And I like that because that was our intent. Our intent was mine project we put on the table doesn't present any significant environmental risks. And this one doesn't. And I think that's why we're going to ultimately get a permit. What comes next is a question. We don't have any current plans to expand this project, but Rick is right. It's a big project. And there may be plans in the future. But those plans have to start all over with permitting from the ground floor. Right now the question is, can a mine this size be built? If somebody comes in with a second proposal, it'll be whether the mine can be built that's this big. And that'll have to be looked at. And if that's too big, it won't get a permit. If it's not too big, it may get a permit. But today, this is the issue that's on the table. And I believe that this particular plan that we put out there is a safe one for the environment, an economic boon to those in the region, and that it ought to get a permit, and that I think it will get a permit.
All right, Tom Collier, Sheila Newman, and Rick Halford, thank you so much for joining us. And thank you for all your information. So basically, what we want to get across today is about how you feel about the issue. Go beyond what you heard today. The EIS is coming out. Take a look at it. Make your own informed decisions, because an informed Alaskan is a better decision maker. So thank you very much for joining us.
You'll hang on just one moment. We have a presentation for our panelists today.
We want to thank the panel for being here. You can see by the room is full, and this is affecting all of us, and this is a discussion that has been ongoing and obviously needs to continue no matter what side of the, what side you're on regarding this. So I really am glad to have heard that and heard the audience being so polite and taking everything in, because we all are very passionate about what we think about this. So, but we do want to thank you, and we have some gifts for each of you, and we appreciate all that you do. Thank you.
On behalf of the forum, I'd like to present some gifts to all of the panel here. We've got a couple of, absolutely, we're happy to do it. We've got some really beautiful ivory and baleen earrings for our women panelists, and again, I know you'll love them and wear them a lot. Maria, expect to see them on TV. And for the men, we have these really cool letter openers. They're ivory, seal carved ivory letter openers that are very gorgeous, and they are actually done by one of the artists from my hometown in Nome. So thank you all very much for your presentation, and thanks to our audience at Alaska Forum. You know, we're all here to be educated and to listen and to learn. That's what I think what each of us come here for every year. And on behalf of the board and the forum, we really thank you for being an attentive audience. We thank you for all of your ability to listen openly, and look forward to continued conversations. Well, thank you very much.
So just a couple quick reminders. We'll be again in this room for lunch this afternoon. You have to have your name tag to get in the room, so make sure you keep track of your name badge. And we have a few minutes after this if you want to come up, and the proper way to thank our speakers, come up and thank them in person, and they'll be here for just a few minutes as you're all filing out your next session. Just a note though, we do have to leave this room pretty quickly because they have to set for lunch. So in the next few minutes that you have, you're welcome to come up and say thank you to our speakers. We really appreciate you both being here. All right, thank you everyone.